Typhoon! Get ready for a whirlwind etymology, because this one's a doozy. I'm Luke, and this is polýMATHY. So this one's kind of crazy, and I'm not even really sure where to begin. So in order to buy myself some thinking time, I'm going to tell you what a typhoon is. Not to be confused with the Eurofighter Typhoon. A typhoon is the same thing as a hurricane, or a tropical cyclone, or a cyclonic storm. It just occurs in the northern Pacific Ocean, while a hurricane is an Atlantic Ocean name for the same kind of weather phenomenon, and elsewhere in the world is called a tropical cyclone or a cyclonic storm. Hurricane, by the way, comes from a Taíno word, which could be from the same Maya word for a god of wind, huracán. And this word comes into Spanish as huracán and furacán with an F sound or an H sound. Back in the 16th century, the sound of F and H, which eventually becomes silent, the letter H, in later forms of Spanish. There's definitely some confusion at this point. Just to give an example, the word filius in Latin, in Spanish, is hijo, and it starts with an H. At some point, there was some kind of H sound that the word began with, which became silent. In Portuguese, though, it gets the name furacão. Hurricane was also the name of a fantastic British airplane from World War II. Now that I've got a second wind, let's talk about a language in the Northern Pacific. I remember when I was living in Tokyo and learning Japanese, and when there were, of course, tropical storms, typhoons that would come and hit Japan occasionally, as they usually do. And the word for typhoon was taifu. Taifu. I was like, oh wow, taifu. That's a lot like English typhoon. Did the Japanese take it from English like they took so many other words?
キャリア、ツアー、バケツ、シリーズ。
Riso. In Italian, riso is rice.
ボランティア。
Or did we take it from Japanese as we took the word tsunami? Well, like all great etymologies, it comes from Latin. Kind of. Just type DYPH in a Latin dictionary, and you can see typhon, which comes from the Greek typhon, which means a typhoon.
No way!
Typhon, or typhon, was a monstrous serpentine creature, and he was a divine power of the wind. He even tried to overthrow Zeus for power of the cosmos. Finally, Typhon was defeated, and he was buried under the Italian island of Ischia, or under Mount Etna in Sicily. I don't really know. That's what Greeks do with their gods and goddesses when they don't want them there. They just kick them out to Italy. Just go. Go Saturn. Go Maya. Go Typhon. We just go. I don't care what island or mountain you are anymore. Just leave. Somewhere in Italy. That's where Greeks just send things they don't care about anymore. Typhon's mate was echidna, an also serpentine female figure. And echidna, who looks like that, is the origin of the word for the animal echidna. No, not that echidna. Although, echidna, yeah, the spiky animal. Or possibly echidnas were actually named that way after confusion with the other Greek word, echidnos, which is a hedgehog. Look at those guys go, whirling about like little typhoons. And appropriately, Sonic the Hedgehog and Knuckles come from Japan. Kakuine, Sonic-san. Well, there you go. Problem solved, right? Yes, I love when the world is so simple and everything comes from Latin and Greek.
Give me a word. Any word, and I show you is Greek.
Except that's not how it got into English. Well, I don't want to blow the wind out of your sails, but I don't think it's actually from Latin or Greek. So it comes into English after you have explorers that go over to India and into the eastern part of Asia, and Portuguese explorers in particular, and they bring back the word tufão. And this word tufão apparently comes from a Hindustani that is both Hindi and Urdu language word, which is tufan, which evidently is from an older Chinese word, which I think may be pronounced something like taifeng. In modern Chinese, in Mandarin, it's tafeng, and the older form of the Chinese word is what eventually in Japanese is taifu. And taifu in Japanese means literally big wind. And the kanji, or Chinese character in Japanese that's used to represent it, is a simplification of an earlier Chinese character, which also means typhoon. So Japanese, taifu, the first character, which looks like this, in its more complicated form, in its older form, in its unsimplified form, that's the kanji for typhoon, and the other is the kanji for wind. So we figured it out. It actually comes from a Chinese origin, ultimately. And the Japanese didn't connect directly with the English. English didn't give it to Japanese. Oh, good. I'm glad we solved that. And it just got from Chinese into the Hindustani languages, picked up by the Portuguese, and brought back during the age of European exploration. Except there's another problem. The Hindustani word tufan, meaning a violent storm, of course, doesn't necessarily come from Chinese, and could possibly come, it would seem, just from Persian. In Persian, it's also tufan. Tufan is Persian for storm, and this Persian word tufan comes from tufidan, which means to roar or to blow furiously. Or the word tufan is actually from an Arabic word tafa, which means to turn around. So wait a minute. We have, by sheer coincidence, 3 geneses of the same word. So it's taifu in Japanese, it's typhoon in English, and this is just coincidental, evidently. How did it get spelled this way? Well, the word typhoon in Latin and ancient Greek, which is typhon, apparently this word is in fact known to people during the age of exploration, and so it is then, by analogy, compared with this in Portuguese, tufão word, and thus spelling is changed in many European languages. And in fact, in English, as we often like to do, in fact, and sometimes erroneously, we make spellings look more archaic. We make spellings look more like Latin or ancient Greek, whether correctly or not. So where is this from? The English spelling is probably a deliberate admixture from Greek to make it look more like an ancient Greco-Latin word, which happens to have the exact same meaning, which is borrowed ultimately from Portuguese sailors who were sailing in the area of India and the eastern part of Asia, picked up the Hindustani word, which maybe came from Persian and also has an Indo-European origin like Greek, or maybe in fact comes from Arabic, or it all comes from an ultimately Sinitic or Chinese origin, or maybe it's just from Japanese. Some sources even say it originated from Greek and got all the way to the Far East and then the Near East, and then that's how it worked, but that's highly, highly implausible. It seems that 2 or 3 separate origins, which happened by coincidence to converge in pronunciation, particularly in English typhoon and Japanese taifu, are just utterly and beautifully coincidental. Sometimes in the world of etymology, you end up with a perfect storm. So I don't know about you, but this one really blew my hair back. What about the word for typhoon or hurricane or big giant tropical storm or other kinds of storms in languages I didn't mention here? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much, as always, to all of my Patreon supporters, because without you, I definitely wouldn't be able to make these videos. So thank you so much. Consider becoming a Patreon supporter, and we'll see you next time.